Matt, you've raised the question for our audience today, why sing? And then you argued that because singing creates a space for encounter with God, and that the elements of that space were that there was vulnerability, that it created the opportunity for transrational or emotional or spiritual experience, and that it created a foundation for the development of community. Can we just go back to the question of vulnerability? What's the importance and the gift of vulnerability in the act of corporate worship and singing?
Yeah, I think vulnerability is something that we all experience when it comes to singing. I think we have a deep sense of what this is. In fact, it's largely the reason we don't want to sing together. When we don't want to sing together, often it's, boy, that feels vulnerable. I'm going to be exposed. I might look naive or worst of all, enthusiastic. That's too much to dare. And I think that the way that our culture treats music kind of prepares us to relate to it that way. We think about reality television or something like that, and we think, boy, standing in front of the judges on American Idol or The Voice, boy, that's vulnerable. I'm going to be judged when I open my mouth and I sing in public. And so I think that in that sense, the vulnerability that corporate singing requires is a kind of barrier to entry. But at the same point, it's actually part of the kind of secret of what makes corporate singing so valuable. Because of course, encountering God, if that's really our goal, requires vulnerability. Vulnerability to love and to be loved. It's interesting, I mentioned in the lecture, when Miroslav and I were with Jürgen Moltmann this summer, talking with him about joy, he said, the biggest threat to joy in our culture is not suffering or pain. Not to minimize those are important. But he said, at least in affluent Western culture, the biggest threat to joy is not pain or sorrow, it's apathy. And I just thought, that's so deeply true, right? When we, and we make a decision to be apathetic, right? We make a decision to decide not to expose ourselves to what's painful in the world. And in doing that, we actually close ourselves off to what's most rich about life and what we most want in life. And so a practice like corporate singing that actually gives us this kind of, puts that vulnerability right in our face, kind of forces us to cross that boundary, or at least strongly invites us to do so. And gives us a framework in which to do that, and we're doing it together, right? We have some reason to do this. I think allows us to kind of cross that threshold and make ourselves available before one another, and certainly vulnerable and available before God. And I think that the reason we don't want to be vulnerable in some cases has to do with because we've experienced environments in which it actually wasn't safe to be vulnerable. And I think our hope is that certainly in youth groups and in youth ministries and in churches in general, hopefully our worship spaces are places that are safe to be vulnerable. And so corporate singing is this mechanism by which we're confronted with the call to become vulnerable in order to encounter God. We're given a natural mechanism through which, just by opening your mouth and singing, you're crossing that threshold that's so hard to cross. And then we're able to in that process actually have this experience of God in a safe environment where our vulnerability is appropriate, and we have a positive experience of that vulnerability.